If it's always someone else's fault, you're not growing. Think for a moment about how often we default to blaming others for the circumstances of our lives, for the failures we experience, for the obstacles that seem to block our progress. It is natural to want to assign responsibility to someone else because it relieves us of discomfort, protects our ego, and temporarily shields us from the reality that personal growth requires accountability. But the truth is, as long as you continue to externalize blame, as long as you continue to insist that it was their actions, their decisions, or their failures that shaped your situation, you are relinquishing the one thing that truly defines your life: your own power to choose, to act, and to grow. When you habitually blame others, you are essentially telling yourself that you are a passive participant in your own life, rather than the active creator of your destiny. Every setback becomes a story of injustice, every mistake becomes someone else's fault, and every failure is explained away through external factors, whether it is bad luck, a difficult boss, unsupportive colleagues, or circumstances beyond your control. In that pattern of thinking lies a trap that prevents learning, prevents growth, and prevents the development of self-discipline. Discipline begins, above all else, with the willingness to face the uncomfortable truth that you are accountable for your choices and for the outcomes that follow. It begins with the courage to look honestly at your life, to recognize the ways in which your own decisions, actions, and inactions have contributed to your current situation. This is not an invitation to self-blame or self-punishment. Rather, it is an invitation to empowerment. Because once you stop pointing fingers at others, once you stop waiting for the world to change so that you can thrive, you suddenly realize that you have always possessed the most potent tool for transformation: your own will, your own capacity to act, and your own responsibility to take control. Growth cannot occur in a landscape of excuses. It cannot occur while the narrative of your life is dictated by other people's mistakes or perceived injustices. True growth requires ownership, requires the acceptance that even when life is unfair, even when events do not unfold according to plan, you still have the power to respond, to adapt, and to create progress through disciplined action. Every time you blame someone else, you diminish your ability to learn from the experience. Every time you insist that external circumstances are the reason for your stagnation, you strengthen habits of passivity, avoidance, and entitlement. But the moment you take ownership, the moment you say, "I am responsible for this," you shift the focus from helplessness to action. You stop waiting for change and start creating it. You begin to see the patterns of your behavior, the decisions that lead to success or failure, and the opportunities for correction and improvement that were always within your reach. This is the essence of self-discipline, the ability to choose action over complaint, to choose responsibility over blame, to choose growth over stagnation. Discipline is not a punishment or a burden. It is a liberation, a freeing of your potential from the chains of avoidance, excuses, and externalization. When you blame others, you surrender that freedom. You become trapped in a narrative where you are a victim, and victims rarely succeed because they give away control. They wait for someone else to fix their problems, to clear the path for them, or to make life easier. And in doing so, they forfeit the chance to develop resilience, perseverance, and the inner strength that comes from self-reliance. The journey toward discipline begins with a single, often uncomfortable, realization that your life, your results, and your growth are your responsibility and yours alone. No one else can live it for you, no one else can make the decisions for you, and no one else can endure the discomfort required to build the skills, habits, and mindset that lead to meaningful progress. It is easy to rationalize, to justify, and to assign blame, but those rationalizations are illusions that delay action and obscure the path forward. Every time you point the finger at someone else, you are essentially saying that you are powerless, that your life is dictated by outside forces rather than by your own deliberate choices. And yet, paradoxically, the very moment you stop blaming, the very moment you accept responsibility, you reclaim power that you may not have realized you had. You gain clarity about your role in the outcomes of your life. You gain the ability to evaluate what you can change, to set goals that align with your true priorities, and to pursue those goals with the focus, persistence, and consistency that define disciplined individuals. Blaming others is a symptom of avoidance. Taking responsibility is a symptom of growth. The transition from one to the other is rarely easy. It often requires confronting uncomfortable truths about your behavior, habits, decisions, and mindset. It requires honesty with yourself, even when it stings. It requires the humility to admit that you were wrong, the courage to correct course, and the determination to take consistent action moving forward. And yet, it is in this process of self-examination, ownership, and action that transformation occurs. When you stop externalizing blame and start internalizing responsibility, you begin to see failure not as a reflection of your limitations but as a teacher, a signal, a guidepost pointing you toward areas where growth is needed. You begin to understand that every obstacle, every challenge, and every mistake carries within it the seeds of improvement. If only you are willing to recognize them and act upon them. The more you practice this mindset, the more natural it becomes. Responsibility becomes a habit, accountability becomes second nature, and discipline becomes a defining characteristic of your identity. You no longer wait for permission or for favorable conditions. You act. You no longer rely on others to create opportunities. You generate them. You no longer seek excuses. You create solutions. In this space of ownership, of personal accountability, of self-discipline, life stops being a series of unfortunate events caused by others and begins to be a canvas upon which you paint the results of your own choices, actions, and efforts. The shift is profound. The shift is transformative. You move from being a passive observer of your life to being an active participant, a deliberate creator, and a person capable of enduring discomfort, overcoming setbacks, and achieving goals that once seemed out of reach. If it's always someone else's fault, you remain stagnant, powerless, and unfulfilled. But when you embrace the truth that you are responsible, you unlock the door to growth, mastery, and freedom, because you finally understand that discipline, accountability, and action are not just tools. They are the very essence of becoming the person you are capable of being. Discipline is not something you are born with. It is something you build, brick by brick, action by action, and day by day, through deliberate effort, consistent practice, and an unwavering commitment to doing what needs to be done even when you do not feel like doing it. And it begins with understanding the difference between motivation and discipline. Because motivation is fleeting, unreliable, and often tied to your emotions or the conditions around you, whereas discipline is steadfast, dependable, and anchored in your willpower and habits. And this distinction is crucial if you want to truly transform your life, because waiting for motivation to strike is a trap that keeps most people stagnant, stuck in the cycle of procrastination, excuses, and unfulfilled potential, while those who cultivate discipline understand that action precedes motivation, that the act of doing, even when it is uncomfortable, tedious, or inconvenient, generates the energy, clarity, and momentum needed to keep moving forward. And the process of building discipline begins small, often imperceptibly, with tiny decisions repeated consistently over time, like waking up at the same hour each day, committing to a few minutes of exercise, setting aside time to plan or reflect, or simply choosing to start a task rather than delaying it. And while these actions may seem insignificant at first, when compounded day after day, week after week, they create an unstoppable momentum, a foundation upon which larger, more significant achievements are built. And the key to this process is not waiting for inspiration, comfort, or perfect conditions, because those rarely exist. Instead, it is about training yourself to act despite resistance, fatigue, fear, or doubt. And this ability to act regardless of circumstances is what separates those who achieve their goals from those who remain stuck in mediocrity. And part of building this ability is embracing the concept of forcing yourself to act, which means understanding that discipline is often about pushing past your natural inclinations, overriding the short-term desire for comfort or pleasure, and committing to the long-term vision of what you want to achieve, because comfort and ease rarely produce growth, but consistent, deliberate action does. And in fact, forcing yourself to start, to take that first step, to make the effort when you do not feel like it, is the foundation of self-mastery, because every time you act despite resistance, you are rewiring your mind, reinforcing new neural pathways, and training your body and mind to respond to your commands rather than to your impulses. And this process is not instantaneous. It requires repetition, patience, and resilience, because you will encounter days when your energy is low, when distractions abound, when life feels overwhelming, and it is precisely in those moments that discipline must be exercised. And every time you push through, you strengthen it, creating a habit of action that becomes increasingly automatic over time, until acting in alignment with your goals is no longer a struggle, but a natural part of your identity. And identity is a crucial aspect of discipline, because who you believe yourself to be shapes the actions you take, the decisions you make, and the persistence you demonstrate. And when you see yourself as someone who follows through, who honors commitments, who acts despite discomfort, you begin to behave in ways consistent with that identity, reinforcing it further. And the compounding effect of this alignment between identity and action is enormous, because small, consistent actions, guided by discipline and reinforced by self-perception, create long-term results far beyond what isolated bursts of effort or fleeting motivation can achieve. And another important component of building discipline is understanding that it is not about perfection, but about consistency, because there will be days when you falter, when your plans go awry, when life interrupts your routines, and discipline is demonstrated not by never failing, but by recommitting immediately, by getting back on track, and by refusing to let temporary setbacks derail your overall progress. And this mindset is what allows you to transform small actions into habits, habits into routines, routines into systems, and systems into lasting results, because life is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous flow in which repeated behaviors, choices, and actions compound over time to produce either growth or stagnation. And the responsibility to choose growth lies squarely in your hands, which is why forcing yourself to act, even when inconvenient, is so critical, because each act of discipline is a vote cast for the person you are becoming, for the life you are creating, and for the potential you are willing to realize. And as you practice this, you will notice a shift in your relationship to effort, because what once felt difficult or burdensome begins to feel natural, manageable, and even empowering, as you internalize the principle that the ability to act despite discomfort is a skill that can be developed, strengthened, and applied to every area of life, from physical health to professional success to personal relationships. And you begin to understand that discipline is not a punishment or a limitation, but a tool, a means of controlling your environment, your actions, and ultimately your destiny, because life will always present challenges, distractions, and temptations, and without discipline, you are at the mercy of circumstance, swayed by moods, impulses, and external pressures. But with discipline, you gain autonomy, control, and confidence, because you know that no matter what life throws at you, you can rely on your ability to act in alignment with your goals, to persevere, to keep moving forward, and to maintain consistency. And this realization itself fuels further action, creating a positive feedback loop in which the more disciplined you become, the easier it is to remain disciplined, because your habits, routines, identity, and environment all reinforce the behaviors that lead to growth, success, and fulfillment, and understanding this creates a profound sense of empowerment, because you realize that your future is not dictated by luck, other people, or circumstances, but by your own actions, choices, and the discipline you cultivate every single day. And this is why discipline is the cornerstone of achievement, because motivation will come and go, inspiration will be fleeting, and opportunities will be inconsistent, but discipline endures, it persists, and it carries you through periods of doubt, fatigue, and adversity, ensuring that you continue to make progress even when external conditions are not ideal, and in this way, forcing yourself to act, to establish routines, to create habits, and to commit to consistency is not just a practice, it is a lifestyle, a philosophy, and a declaration that you are in control of your life, your results, and your growth. And once you internalize this, once you truly embrace the concept that discipline is built through small, repeated actions taken consistently over time, you will begin to experience a transformation that is profound, cumulative, and irreversible, because you are no longer waiting for motivation, luck, or ideal conditions. You are creating your own momentum, shaping your own destiny, and building the life you want through deliberate, disciplined, persistent action that compounds into extraordinary results. Self-deception is one of the most dangerous enemies of discipline because it hides in plain sight, whispering lies that make us comfortable while subtly sabotaging our potential, and it thrives on the excuses we tell ourselves, the justifications we create, and the illusions we nurture to avoid confronting the hard truths about our habits, decisions, and actions. And it begins with the small things, the seemingly innocent rationalizations that allow us to postpone effort, to delay responsibility, or to avoid discomfort, because self-deception rarely announces itself in dramatic ways. It creeps in gradually, persuading us to believe that tomorrow will be easier, that we deserve a break, that this time the rules do not apply, or that our lack of action is justified by circumstances beyond our control. And as long as we allow these thoughts to dictate our behavior, we remain trapped in a cycle of procrastination, inconsistency, and stagnation, convincing ourselves that the barriers we face are external rather than internal. And in doing so, we surrender our power, because the moment we place blame, rationalize our inaction, or succumb to the comfort of excuses, we abdicate the responsibility that is essential to growth. And the irony is that we often pride ourselves on intelligence, talent, or creativity, yet our progress is held hostage by the simplest form of dishonesty, lying to ourselves about our willingness to act, our ability to endure discomfort, or our commitment to our goals. And this is why recognizing and confronting self-deception is critical to building discipline, because discipline cannot thrive in an environment of lies and illusions. It can only flourish when we face reality unflinchingly, accept our limitations, acknowledge our weaknesses, and take deliberate action to correct our course, even when it is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or challenging. And understanding this begins with awareness, because the first step to overcoming self-deception is to notice the subtle ways it manifests in our thoughts, behaviors, and routines. And once we cultivate that awareness, we can begin to challenge it, question it, and replace it with truth and action. And truth, in this sense, is a powerful catalyst for discipline, because it strips away excuses, reveals the path forward, and forces us to confront the gap between who we are and who we aspire to become. And the process of confronting this gap is rarely easy, because it requires humility, honesty, and the willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable facts about ourselves, including the moments when we have failed, when we have been lazy, when we have avoided responsibility, or when we have allowed fear, doubt, or emotion to dictate our behavior. And yet it is precisely this willingness to see ourselves clearly, to face the uncomfortable truths, and to act despite them, that separates disciplined individuals from those who remain trapped in cycles of underachievement and frustration, and the act of forcing oneself to take that first step despite hesitation or doubt, is a practice that must be cultivated repeatedly, because the mind will naturally resist discomfort, the body will naturally seek ease, and the habits formed by years of self-deception will attempt to pull you back into old patterns. And this is why discipline is often described as a muscle that grows stronger the more it is exercised, because each time you confront self-deception, refuse to accept excuses, and take deliberate action, you are strengthening your capacity to act in alignment with your goals, to persevere through adversity, and to maintain consistency even when motivation is absent or circumstances are challenging. And over time, these repeated acts of courage, honesty, and commitment compound into habits that define character, habits that reinforce identity, and habits that create a foundation for long-term growth and achievement. Because who you become is a reflection of what you repeatedly do, and if your actions are consistently aligned with truth, responsibility, and disciplined effort, your results will inevitably follow. And yet the challenge remains that self-deception is cunning and persistent, because it is comfortable, seductive, and often emotionally soothing, offering temporary relief from the discomfort of reality. And this is why overcoming it requires vigilance, mindfulness, and deliberate strategies, including reflection, accountability, planning, and the cultivation of an internal dialogue that constantly reminds you of your goals, responsibilities, and potential, because the mind will always seek the path of least resistance, and without conscious effort, it will default to excuses, rationalizations, and avoidance, undermining progress and eroding confidence. And one of the most powerful ways to combat self-deception is through action itself, because action has a way of dispelling doubt, building clarity, and reinforcing truth. And the simple act of starting a task, completing a small goal, or confronting a challenge serves as proof that you are capable, that excuses are unnecessary, and that progress is always possible. And as you continue to act in alignment with your intentions, you create a feedback loop in which success reinforces discipline, and discipline reinforces action, and action reinforces identity, creating an upward spiral that propels you toward growth, achievement, and fulfillment. And the alternative, of course, is to succumb to self-deception, to rationalize inaction, to delay, to procrastinate, and to continue pointing fingers. And in doing so, you not only prevent progress, but you also erode self-trust, weaken confidence, and gradually internalize a narrative of powerlessness, helplessness, and stagnation. Because every time you allow self-deception to dictate behavior, you are reinforcing the idea that you are not capable of consistent effort, that you cannot endure discomfort, and that external factors are more important than your own decisions and actions. And the truth is, none of that is accurate, because within every individual lies the capacity to act, to endure, to persist, and to overcome. And the key to unlocking that capacity is the willingness to see yourself honestly, to recognize where self-deception is operating, and to force yourself into action regardless of fear, doubt, fatigue, or resistance. And when you consistently practice this, you begin to develop a level of self-trust, confidence, and resilience that becomes almost unshakable, because you know from experience that when you act despite hesitation, you succeed. When you refuse to accept excuses, you progress. And when you confront your own illusions, you grow. And this understanding transforms the way you approach every challenge, every task, and every goal, because it becomes clear that the only real obstacles in life are the ones you accept, the lies you tell yourself, and the excuses you allow to guide your behavior. And once this is understood and internalized, the act of forcing oneself to act, to confront reality, and to embrace discomfort becomes not just a practice, but a philosophy, a guiding principle, and a way of life. And as you continue to cultivate this approach, the power of self-deception diminishes, the strength of discipline grows, and the trajectory of your life shifts from one of stagnation, excuse, and limitation to one of growth, responsibility, achievement, and mastery, because the moment you commit to truth, accountability, and action, you reclaim control over your life, and you begin to experience the profound freedom and empowerment that comes from knowing that no matter what challenges arise, you have the ability, the discipline, and the integrity to act in alignment with your highest goals and aspirations. You must embrace discomfort if you truly want to cultivate discipline and achieve growth, because all meaningful progress, all transformative change, and all accomplishments of value are born outside the comfort zone, in the moments that challenge your body, mind, and spirit. And yet most people instinctively avoid discomfort, preferring ease, familiarity, and the temporary relief of comfort, which is why so many remain stagnant, frustrated, and unfulfilled, thinking that success, skill, or personal growth should come easily, naturally, or without effort. But the reality is that the path to mastery, resilience, and self-discipline is littered with resistance, struggle, and challenges that feel uncomfortable precisely because they demand that you rise above your natural inclinations toward laziness, procrastination, and avoidance. And embracing discomfort begins with a shift in mindset, a conscious choice to see pain, difficulty, and struggle not as obstacles to be avoided, but as essential catalysts for growth, because every time you step into discomfort, whether it is physical, mental, emotional, or situational, you are stretching the limits of your capacity, strengthening your resilience, and training your mind and body to perform under conditions that others would run from. And this process is rarely easy, because discomfort triggers fear, hesitation, and resistance, which is why most people fail to persist, give up prematurely, or seek the illusion of progress through shortcuts, avoidance, or temporary relief. Yet those who embrace discomfort understand that the temporary pain of effort, the mental strain of focus, the emotional tension of challenging experiences, and the physical fatigue of consistent work are all investments in the development of skills, habits, and character that last a lifetime. And in fact, discomfort is often the most reliable indicator that you are moving in the right direction, because if you feel easy, comfortable, and at ease, you are probably not stretching, not learning, and not growing. But if you feel resistance, struggle, or tension, you are in the arena of growth, and each moment of struggle, each task that tests your patience, endurance, and willpower is an opportunity to strengthen the habits of discipline that will define your life. And embracing this reality requires a deliberate commitment to act even when the immediate rewards are absent, even when the work is tedious, repetitive, or inconvenient, and even when the mind and body are screaming for relief, because discipline is forged precisely in these moments of voluntary effort in the face of resistance. And over time, this consistent practice of enduring, pushing, and persisting transforms not only your abilities, but also your identity, because when you repeatedly choose action over comfort, perseverance over quitting, and growth over stagnation, you internalize a sense of competence, resilience, and self-trust that becomes a defining feature of who you are. And it is important to understand that discomfort is not limited to physical exertion. It appears in countless forms. Mental challenges, emotional vulnerability, social risks, learning new skills, taking responsibility, confronting fears, and making decisions that go against conventional thinking or popular opinion. And in each of these arenas, the same principle applies. Discomfort signals opportunity, challenge, and the potential for growth. And the more willing you are to face it, the faster you develop the mental toughness, emotional resilience, and self-discipline necessary to achieve your goals. And while this process can feel intimidating, exhausting, or even unfair at times, it is precisely the contrast between comfort and discomfort that shapes character, because growth only occurs when you are pushed beyond what feels easy. And every time you resist the urge to retreat into comfort, You are reinforcing a habit of courage, persistence, and action that compounds into lasting change. And embracing discomfort also teaches you to tolerate uncertainty, frustration, and ambiguity, because life rarely presents challenges neatly packaged. And the ability to endure difficulty without giving up is essential to navigating the complexities, setbacks, and obstacles that inevitably arise. And in fact, many of the greatest successes, innovations, and personal transformations in history are the result of individuals choosing to persist in discomfort when others would have quit. And by observing this, we see that the willingness to embrace challenge is a common denominator among those who achieve remarkable results, because they understand that the temporary discomfort of effort is nothing compared to the permanent gains of growth, mastery, and accomplishment. And embracing discomfort also changes your perception of failure, because failure is rarely comfortable, yet it is an indispensable teacher, a necessary step in the journey toward competence, confidence, and self-discipline. And those who avoid discomfort often avoid failure as well, thereby depriving themselves of the lessons and insights that only experience can provide. While those who face discomfort, who persevere through struggle, who continue to act even in the face of repeated setbacks, gradually develop a resilience, creativity, and problem-solving ability that others cannot replicate. And this is why embracing discomfort is not optional for those who seek to grow. It is a requirement, a principle, and a philosophy, because it ensures that your mind, body, and spirit are continuously stretched, challenged, and strengthened. And the cumulative effect of repeatedly choosing discomfort over ease is transformative, because it rewires your neural pathways, conditions your emotional responses, strengthens your will, and builds the habit of action that defines disciplined individuals. And it is also worth noting that embracing discomfort is not about seeking pain for its own sake. It is about recognizing that meaningful, lasting growth, achievement, and personal development inherently involve challenge, struggle, and effort, and that by willingly stepping into these moments, you are actively participating in your own transformation rather than passively waiting for success, luck, or favorable circumstances to arrive. And as you practice this consistently, you begin to notice a profound shift in your perception of life, work, and challenges, because what once seemed daunting, intimidating, or unbearable begins to feel manageable, empowering, and even exciting, as you realize that you have cultivated the ability to endure, persist, and succeed regardless of external conditions. And in this way, embracing discomfort becomes a habit, an identity, and a core principle of self-discipline, because you internalize the understanding that the more consistently you confront and endure difficulty, the stronger, more capable, and more resilient you become. And ultimately, this approach empowers you to navigate life's inevitable challenges with confidence, composure, and purpose, because you have trained yourself to act, persist, and grow in spite of discomfort. And it is precisely this ability to embrace challenge, endure struggle, and consistently choose growth over ease that separates those who achieve extraordinary results from those who remain stuck in mediocrity. And the lesson is simple yet profound: discomfort is not the enemy. Avoidance is effort in the face of challenge, is not punishment. It is investment. And discipline is not about seeking ease. It is about enduring, persisting, and acting regardless of circumstances, because the reward for embracing discomfort is not temporary satisfaction, but lasting growth, mastery, and the freedom to become the person you are capable of being. Time is your most valuable resource, and yet it is the one thing most people waste without realizing its true cost, because unlike money, talent, or possessions, time cannot be regained once it passes, and every moment you squander, every hour spent scrolling aimlessly, complaining, procrastinating, or avoiding responsibility, is an opportunity lost that will never return, which is why discipline is critical in how you manage and protect it. And building discipline around time begins with recognizing its scarcity and inevitability, understanding that the clock ticks the same for everyone, regardless of circumstances, wealth, or background, and the difference between those who achieve extraordinary results and those who do not often comes down to how intentionally they allocate and guard their time. Because time is not neutral, it rewards focus, consistency, and deliberate action while punishing distraction, inconsistency, and neglect. And yet so many people live passively, allowing their days to be dictated by convenience, mood, or external pressures rather than by deliberate choice, which is why the first step in forcing yourself to be disciplined with time is to stop waiting for ideal conditions, for motivation, or for inspiration, and instead take ownership of every minute, every hour, and every day, because no one else will act on your behalf, and waiting for circumstances to be perfect only leads to wasted time and missed opportunities. And one of the most effective ways to cultivate this kind of discipline is through intentional planning and prioritization, because clarity about what truly matters, clarity about your goals, and clarity about your most important tasks enables you to allocate your time efficiently, make decisions quickly, and resist the temptation of distractions. And prioritization requires ruthless honesty, because every hour you spend on low-value activities is an hour stolen from actions that build your future. And to protect your time, you must become adept at saying no, not out of fear or avoidance, but out of respect for your own goals, ambitions, and potential, because every yes to something trivial or unnecessary is simultaneously a no to something meaningful and important. And this understanding is central to developing time-based discipline, because it transforms decision-making from a reactive process to a proactive one, and it forces you to take responsibility for how each moment is used, understanding that inaction is also a choice, and a choice that carries consequences. And managing time effectively also requires the cultivation of routines, habits, and systems that reduce decision fatigue. Because the human brain has a limited capacity for sustained focus and willpower, and when energy is wasted on trivial choices, it leaves less available for meaningful, high-impact work. And routines such as a consistent morning schedule, designated work periods, focused blocks of attention, and intentional breaks create structure, minimize wasted energy, and enhance efficiency, allowing you to act with discipline even when motivation is absent. And this is why disciplined individuals often appear to achieve so much. They do not rely on bursts of inspiration or fleeting motivation, but on well-designed habits, systems, and boundaries that ensure action happens consistently, regardless of how they feel. And this is reinforced by the principle of deliberate focus, because it is not enough to merely allocate time. You must protect it from distractions, interruptions, and the endless noise of modern life, including social media, unnecessary meetings, trivial obligations, and the constant pull of novelty. And by training yourself to work in concentrated, uninterrupted periods, you exponentially increase your productivity and your ability to make meaningful progress, because depth of focus amplifies results far more than superficial, scattered effort. And protecting your time also means learning to anticipate and manage the unexpected, because life will invariably present emergencies, distractions, and demands on your attention, and disciplined individuals develop the foresight, flexibility, and boundaries necessary to absorb these without derailing their priorities. And this requires a combination of planning, reflection, and strategic thinking, because every choice to act, delay, delegate, or decline carries an opportunity cost. And understanding this is fundamental to exercising true mastery over your time. And mastery over time in turn strengthens discipline, because when you recognize that every minute matters, that wasted time is lost potential, and that consistent action is the key to achieving meaningful goals, you become increasingly intentional, deliberate, and responsible in all aspects of your life. And this intentionality builds momentum because once you establish the habit of protecting and prioritizing your time, it becomes easier to sustain focus, resist distractions, and take consistent action, creating a positive cycle where disciplined time management fuels achievement, and achievement reinforces disciplined behavior. And yet this process requires vigilance because the human tendency is to drift, to procrastinate, and to succumb to the comfort of inaction. And without conscious effort, even the most disciplined routines can erode, leading to wasted hours, lost opportunities, and frustration. And this is why self-awareness, reflection, and regular evaluation of how time is spent are critical components of maintaining discipline. Because without examining how you allocate your hours, you cannot know whether your actions are aligned with your highest priorities or simply filling space without purpose. And reflection allows you to course correct, refine your habits, and recommit to using your time intentionally, because discipline is not about perfection, but about consistency, persistence, and the conscious choice to act in alignment with your goals day after day, week after week, and year after year. And this perspective transforms the way you view challenges, obligations, and even leisure, because it is not about avoiding enjoyment or relaxation, but about ensuring that your actions, rest and recreation are intentionally aligned with your broader life goals. And in doing so, you create a rhythm, a structure, and a pattern of behavior that maximizes growth, reduces wasted effort, and produces cumulative, long-term results that far surpass what sporadic bursts of effort could achieve. And ultimately, the discipline of protecting your time is inseparable from the discipline of protecting your life, because how you spend your hours determines the trajectory of your personal growth, professional achievement, relationships, health, and overall fulfillment. And those who learn to guard their time, prioritize effectively, plan intentionally, focus deeply, and act consistently are the ones who transform potential into reality, goals into accomplishments, and dreams into tangible results, while those who neglect this discipline drift through life at the mercy of distraction, circumstance, and procrastination. And the lesson is clear: every moment matters, every choice has consequences, and the ability to force yourself to act with intention, to protect your time, and to prioritize relentlessly is one of the most powerful forms of self-discipline, because it ensures that your days are spent building the life you want rather than living passively, reacting to circumstances or waiting for opportunities to appear. And in this way, mastering your time is synonymous with mastering your life, because when you act with discipline in how you allocate, protect, and use every moment, you gain the freedom, control, and momentum necessary to achieve extraordinary results, fulfill your potential, and create the future you desire. And nothing in life has a greater return on investment than disciplined management of the one resource that can never be replenished: time. Habits are the architecture of discipline, the framework upon which the structure of your life is built, because while willpower is important, it is finite and unreliable, and relying on motivation alone is like trying to build a house on sand, whereas habits, once established, operate automatically, freeing your energy and focus for more complex decisions and actions. And the process of building habits begins with small, deliberate actions repeated consistently over time, because even minor behaviors, when performed daily, compound into extraordinary results, shaping not only your performance but also your identity, because who you become is the sum of what you repeatedly do. And habits are the bridge between intention and achievement, between desire and reality. Yet so many people underestimate their importance, thinking that discipline is a matter of occasional bursts of effort, fleeting motivation, or sporadic inspiration. And this misconception is precisely why so many fail to achieve their goals, because without systems and habits, effort is inconsistent, progress is fragile, and momentum is lost at the slightest disruption. And creating effective habits requires clarity about what you want to achieve, because without a defined goal, your habits are aimless, and aimless habits produce inconsistent outcomes and wasted energy. And once you define your goal, you must identify the actions, routines, and behaviors that support it, breaking down large, intimidating objectives into manageable, repeatable tasks that can be integrated into your daily life, because it is consistency, not intensity, that builds lasting change. And the key to making habits stick is to start small, to create actions so simple and manageable that resistance is minimized. Because the more friction and discomfort a habit requires initially, the more likely it is that your mind and body will resist. And by starting with small, achievable actions, you build confidence, prove to yourself that consistency is possible, and lay the foundation for progressively larger, more challenging behaviors. And it is also essential to link habits to existing routines, using the power of triggers and cues to remind you to act, because the human brain is wired to respond to patterns. And when a new habit is anchored to a familiar behavior or environment, it becomes easier to maintain, and over time, repetition transforms the action from conscious effort into automatic behavior, creating a system that functions without constant reliance on willpower. And yet building habits also requires vigilance and self-awareness, because habits can be sabotaged by unconscious behaviors, emotional impulses, or environmental triggers. And by reflecting regularly on your routines, monitoring your performance, and adjusting where necessary, you ensure that your habits remain aligned with your goals and values. And another critical aspect of habit formation is accountability, because when your actions are observed, tracked, or measured, you are more likely to follow through. And external accountability, whether through a mentor, coach, friend, or tracking system, reinforces internal discipline, creating a feedback loop that strengthens both consistency and motivation. And as habits become established, they begin to shape your identity, because repeated actions influence your beliefs about yourself, your capabilities, and your character. And when you consistently act in alignment with your intentions, you internalize the identity of someone who follows through, perseveres, and prioritizes growth over comfort. And this identity then reinforces the habit, creating a virtuous cycle in which action strengthens belief, and belief strengthens action. And as your habits compound over months and years, they produce results far beyond what effort alone, without structure, could achieve, because life is ultimately a long-term game, and small, consistent actions create leverage, momentum, and cumulative advantage. And yet the process is not without challenges, because resistance, distraction, fatigue, and temptation are constant, and the mind will often seek the path of least resistance, attempting to revert to old, comfortable patterns. And this is why discipline is required alongside habit, because habits provide the structure, but discipline ensures adherence, adjustment, and persistence in the face of obstacles. And the synergy between habit and discipline is powerful, because habit reduces the reliance on fragile willpower, and discipline ensures that when habits falter, consistency is restored, creating a resilient system for sustained achievement. And it is also important to recognize that not all habits are equal, and some habits have disproportionate effects on your life, because keystone habits, such as consistent exercise, planning, reading, or focused work, create cascading benefits, improving energy, focus, decision-making, and overall performance. And by identifying and cultivating these high-impact habits, you can accelerate growth, amplify results, and reinforce other positive behaviors. And another essential principle is to focus on identity-based habits rather than outcome-based habits, because when you center your behaviors around the person you want to become, rather than solely the goals you want to achieve, your actions become sustainable, resilient, and aligned with long-term growth. And identity-based habits create a sense of consistency and purpose that outcome-based habits often cannot, because they are reinforced by who you believe yourself to be, rather than by external measures that may fluctuate or fail. And in this way, habits do not simply produce results, they transform character, strengthen will, and shape the trajectory of your life, because the accumulation of repeated, intentional actions defines your performance, relationships, opportunities, and potential. And as you master the art of habit formation, you begin to understand that discipline is not about forcing yourself to act sporadically or dramatically, but about creating systems, routines, and structures that make action natural, inevitable, and sustainable. And this perspective transforms the way you approach effort, growth, and success, because it shifts the focus from reliance on fleeting motivation to reliance on consistent systems, automatic behaviors, and identity-aligned action. And when habits, routines, and identity align with discipline, the result is a life in which action, progress, and achievement occur naturally, predictably, and continuously, creating momentum that carries you forward regardless of temporary setbacks, discomfort, or emotional fluctuation. And this is why habits are the architecture of discipline, because they construct the environment, mindset, and behaviors necessary to translate intention into reality, desire into action, and potential into achievement. And when combined with reflection, accountability, and persistence, habits become the engine that drives extraordinary results, long-term growth, and the ability to consistently perform at a high level. And the ultimate lesson is clear. If you want to force yourself to be disciplined, you must focus on building the right habits, starting small, acting consistently, aligning them with your identity, protecting them from disruption, and allowing them to compound over time, because habits are the foundation upon which all sustained discipline, mastery, and success are built, and without them, even the most well-intentioned efforts are fragile, inconsistent, and unlikely to produce lasting impact. But with them, you can transform your daily actions into unstoppable momentum, your intentions into tangible results, and your potential into reality, because discipline without habit is fleeting, but habit reinforced by discipline becomes enduring, unstoppable, and transformative. Accountability is one of the most powerful tools for cultivating discipline, and yet it is often overlooked or misunderstood, because many people assume that self-discipline alone is sufficient to achieve success, growth, and mastery. But the truth is that without accountability, even the most disciplined intentions can falter under the weight of distraction, temptation, or waning motivation, and accountability works on multiple levels, beginning with personal accountability, which is the willingness to take complete responsibility for your actions, decisions, and outcomes, to honestly evaluate your performance, to admit mistakes, and to commit to improvement without relying on external validation, praise, or enforcement, because true growth requires honesty with oneself. And when you consistently hold yourself accountable, you develop the integrity, resilience, and clarity necessary to act consistently and effectively. And personal accountability is not passive or abstract. It is an active practice, requiring reflection, assessment, and deliberate action. Because without a conscious review of your behaviors, you cannot identify areas of weakness, correct errors, or reinforce positive patterns, and this process builds self-trust, confidence, and a sense of ownership over your life, which are essential components of discipline. And yet personal accountability alone is sometimes insufficient, because humans are social creatures, and the presence of external accountability often amplifies effort, commitment, and consistency, because when someone else is observing, measuring, or expecting results from you, the natural tendency to act in alignment with expectations reinforces discipline. And this is why mentorship, coaching, peer support, or even public commitment can dramatically increase the likelihood of success, because external accountability provides feedback, guidance, encouragement, and the pressure necessary to overcome procrastination, distraction, or avoidance, and it creates a system in which failure is noticeable, reflection is required, and improvement becomes a necessity. And accountability is also critical because it transforms abstract goals into measurable, actionable commitments, because it forces clarity about what you are actually doing, why you are doing it, and how progress will be assessed. And without accountability, goals remain vague, intentions remain inconsistent, and effort is often sporadic, leading to stagnation, frustration, and the false belief that action is occurring when in reality, minimal progress is made. And this is why accountability is often described as the bridge between intention and results, because it converts desire into action, ambition into measurable outcomes, and potential into tangible achievement. And the practice of accountability requires a mindset shift, because it demands that you view mistakes, setbacks, and failures not as shameful events to be hidden, but as data, feedback, and opportunities for growth, because every failure provides information about what works, what does not, and what adjustments are necessary. And those who embrace accountability use this information to refine their approach, improve consistency, and strengthen habits, while those who reject accountability often repeat mistakes, ignore feedback, and blame external factors for their lack of progress, thereby undermining both discipline and growth. And another critical component of accountability is specificity, because vague commitments like, "I will work harder," or "I will try to be more disciplined," are insufficient, whereas clear, measurable actions, such as, "I will complete 2 focused work sessions daily," or "I will exercise for 30 minutes every morning," create clarity, focus, and a tangible standard against which progress can be assessed. And without this specificity, accountability is weakened, because it becomes difficult to determine whether goals are being met or if effort is sufficient. And over time, the consistent application of accountability, both internal and external, builds a feedback loop in which reflection informs action, action reinforces habits, and habits reinforce identity, because repeated follow-through, measured progress, and honest evaluation shape the perception of oneself as a disciplined, responsible, and capable individual. And this identity then further strengthens accountability, because when you see yourself as someone who follows through and honors commitments, you are more likely to act in alignment with that self-concept, creating a virtuous cycle in which discipline becomes self-reinforcing, sustainable, and increasingly automatic. And it is also important to recognize that accountability is not solely about monitoring success, but about fostering learning, resilience, and adaptability, because even when goals are not fully achieved, the act of measuring performance, reflecting on outcomes, and adjusting strategies ensures continued progress, improvement, and development, rather than stagnation or repetition of ineffective patterns. And accountability also strengthens focus, because it creates a structure in which distractions, delays, or avoidance are noticeable, measurable, and actionable. And this awareness motivates corrective action, reinforces priorities, and reduces the likelihood of wasted effort. And in addition, accountability cultivates discipline by building mental toughness, because when you know that your actions are being observed, measured, and evaluated, you develop the ability to persist through discomfort, resistance, or temporary setbacks, knowing that consistent effort is required to meet the standards you have set for yourself or agreed upon with others. And over time, this repeated practice of follow-through, monitoring, and correction strengthens self-control, enhances focus, and solidifies habits, creating a durable, long-term foundation for achievement. And another key aspect of accountability is the social dimension, because humans are inherently influenced by others, and when you commit to mentors, peers, or a community, you are leveraging the power of social expectations, encouragement, and support to reinforce disciplined behavior, because the desire to honor commitments, avoid embarrassment, or meet standards set by others taps into deep psychological motivators that enhance persistence and consistency. and this social component complements personal accountability by providing external reinforcement, feedback, and perspective, which are invaluable in sustaining long-term discipline, growth, and progress. And yet accountability must be balanced with self-compassion, because harsh self-criticism, excessive guilt, or unrealistic expectations can undermine performance, motivation, and resilience, whereas a constructive, growth-oriented approach to accountability emphasizes learning, adaptation, and incremental improvement, recognizing that discipline is built over time through repeated effort, reflection, and refinement, rather than through immediate perfection. And by combining personal responsibility, external feedback, reflection, and a growth mindset, accountability becomes a powerful engine for self-discipline, because it ensures that actions are aligned with goals, that mistakes are corrected, that habits are reinforced, and that progress is continuously measured. And ultimately, those who consistently practice accountability in all its forms develop an extraordinary capacity for discipline, because they internalize the principles of ownership, responsibility, reflection, and persistence, creating a life in which intention, action, and results are aligned, and where growth, achievement, and mastery are inevitable outcomes of consistent, measured, and deliberate effort. And the lesson is clear: if you want to force yourself to be disciplined, you must embrace accountability not as a burden, but as a tool, a structure, and a catalyst that transforms desire into action, potential into achievement, and ordinary effort into extraordinary results. Emotions are temporary, but action is permanent, and this principle is at the core of self-discipline, because too often we allow feelings such as fear, doubt, frustration, anxiety, or fatigue to dictate whether we act, delaying our progress and leaving potential unrealized. And the truth is that emotions, while real and powerful, are fleeting and unreliable, fluctuating from moment to moment. Yet if we wait for perfect emotional conditions to act, we will rarely achieve anything meaningful, because life is unpredictable, and circumstances, moods, and external conditions rarely align perfectly with our goals or intentions, which is why the ability to act despite how you feel is a defining characteristic of disciplined individuals, because action taken regardless of temporary discomfort or emotional turbulence builds momentum, creates results, and strengthens your capacity to continue acting, even when emotions are contrary. And this principle applies to every area of life, whether it is pursuing a career goal, maintaining physical health, developing a skill, or building meaningful relationships. Because in each case, waiting for motivation, confidence, or emotional readiness is an invitation to procrastination, stagnation, and unfulfilled potential. And the process of acting despite emotions begins with awareness, recognizing that feelings are not commands, that discomfort is not a signal to stop, and that hesitation often masks the exact moment when growth occurs, because emotional resistance usually arises precisely at the threshold of meaningful action. And the difference between those who achieve extraordinary results and those who do not is often the willingness to move forward when it feels uncomfortable, inconvenient, or challenging, because action overcomes the inertia of fear, doubt, and uncertainty, and it creates clarity, progress, and confidence, which in turn reinforces further action, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of discipline, productivity, and growth. And yet the challenge remains that humans are wired to seek comfort and avoid pain, to respond to emotional impulses rather than rational decisions, and to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term benefit. And this natural tendency makes it difficult to act consistently, which is why discipline must be cultivated intentionally, because without deliberate practice, the pull of emotion, habit, and convenience will dominate, undermining goals and potential. And one of the most effective strategies for acting despite emotions is to establish routines, habits, and systems that reduce reliance on fluctuating feelings, because when action becomes automatic, habitual, and non-negotiable, it is less susceptible to emotional interference, And over time, these systems create a foundation upon which discipline can flourish, because repeated action builds confidence, competence, and resilience, proving to yourself that results are achieved through consistency rather than temporary bursts of inspiration. And another crucial aspect of acting despite emotions is to break tasks into small, manageable steps, because large, daunting goals often trigger emotional resistance, procrastination, or avoidance, whereas incremental action creates progress, momentum, and a sense of accomplishment that reinforces continued effort. And by consistently practicing this approach, you develop the skill of persistence, because you learn to act regardless of initial resistance, doubt, or discomfort, understanding that emotions will ebb and flow, but action compounds over time, producing results far beyond what fleeting motivation can achieve. And it is also important to cultivate mental frameworks that support this approach, such as reframing discomfort as a sign of growth, seeing fear as an indicator of opportunity, and viewing doubt as a signal to act rather than delay, because these mental shifts transform emotional resistance into a compass that guides rather than hinders. And by consistently applying these frameworks, you strengthen emotional resilience, improve decision-making, and enhance your capacity to act under pressure, stress, or uncertainty. And in doing so, you gradually train yourself to prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term feelings, to pursue meaningful goals despite temporary discomfort, and to maintain momentum even when external conditions are challenging. And another critical element of acting despite emotions is accountability, because when others are relying on you, observing your progress, or expecting results, the pressure to act becomes external as well as internal, and this external accountability reinforces the habit of acting even when emotional readiness is absent, because consistent follow-through becomes a necessity rather than an option. And over time, the combination of internal awareness, mental frameworks, habitual action, incremental steps, and external accountability strengthens your ability to act regardless of emotions, building what psychologists call behavioral resilience, the capacity to continue performing even when feelings are adverse, which is essential for achieving long-term goals. And this skill translates across every domain of life, from professional performance to personal growth, health, relationships, and creative pursuits, because success is rarely determined by how one feels, but by what one does consistently. And the ability to act despite fear, doubt, fatigue, frustration, or discomfort is what separates high performers from those who never fully realize their potential. And in fact, the very act of doing something difficult, while emotionally resistant, creates a feedback loop that strengthens confidence, competence, and self-efficacy, because each successful action proves to yourself that you can endure discomfort, navigate uncertainty, and still produce results. And this proof reinforces further action, creating momentum that compounds over time, building discipline, resilience, and mastery. And yet, it is crucial to recognize that acting despite emotions does not mean ignoring feelings entirely, suppressing them, or being reckless, because emotions contain valuable information about priorities, needs, and limits, and the key is to acknowledge them without allowing them to dictate action, which requires both awareness and practice. And when done effectively, this approach creates a balance in which you are attuned to your emotional state, using it as information rather than instruction, while consistently acting in alignment with long-term goals, values, and priorities. And the results of developing this ability are profound, because you gain control over your behavior regardless of mood swings, setbacks, distractions, or temptations. And this control is the essence of self-discipline, the ability to consistently act in alignment with your highest priorities, and to maintain focus, effort, and persistence even in the face of adversity, challenge, or discomfort. And over time, this capacity becomes self-reinforcing, because acting despite emotions builds identity, self-trust, and confidence, which further reduces the influence of temporary feelings on action. And as you continue to practice, the process becomes increasingly natural, intuitive, and automatic, allowing you to achieve extraordinary results, fulfill your potential, and cultivate a life characterized by consistency, purpose, and mastery. And the ultimate lesson is clear: while emotions will always fluctuate, while motivation will rise and fall, the power to act remains within you, and it is through deliberate, consistent, and persistent action, despite how you feel in the moment, that you develop discipline, achieve results, and transform your life into one of intentional growth, progress, and achievement, because action taken now, regardless of emotion, has lasting consequences, whereas waiting for perfect feelings or ideal circumstances only delays progress, diminishes opportunity, and undermines potential. And this understanding is the cornerstone of self-discipline, because it empowers you to move forward under any conditions, build momentum in spite of resistance, and create a life of results, growth, and mastery that is not dictated by fleeting emotions, but by consistent, deliberate, and purposeful action. Focus is the hidden engine behind every achievement, the silent force that determines whether your actions lead to meaningful results or scatter into wasted effort. Because without the ability to concentrate your energy on what truly matters, even the most disciplined individual can find their time, effort, and potential diluted by distractions, competing priorities, and the endless noise of modern life. And yet focus is not simply about paying attention. It is about deliberate, sustained attention on high-value activities that align with your goals, values, and long-term vision. Because shallow, scattered activity may create the illusion of productivity, but it rarely generates meaningful outcomes. And the cultivation of focus begins with clarity, because you cannot concentrate on what is important if you do not first define what matters most. And defining priorities requires honesty, discernment, and the courage to eliminate, postpone, or delegate everything that does not contribute to your objectives. Because attention is finite, energy is limited, and every moment spent on low-value tasks diminishes the time available for high-impact work. And yet, even when priorities are clear, maintaining focus is a skill that requires deliberate practice, because the mind naturally gravitates toward distraction, novelty, comfort, and immediate gratification, and this is why attention must be trained and protected. Because every time you allow interruption, procrastination, or scattered effort to dominate, you erode discipline, waste potential, and compromise outcomes. And one of the most effective methods for cultivating focus is to structure your environment, because the physical and digital spaces in which you operate either support concentration or undermine it. And by eliminating unnecessary stimuli, creating dedicated work zones, and setting boundaries around your attention, you reinforce the habit of sustained concentration, making it easier to enter a state of deep work, flow, and high productivity. And focus also requires intentional time management, because attention is not an unlimited resource, and attempting to multitask or constantly shift between tasks fragments mental energy, reduces efficiency, and increases the likelihood of errors, whereas setting aside dedicated blocks of uninterrupted time for high-priority work allows you to apply sustained mental effort, produce higher quality results, and build the habit of concentrating on what truly matters. And in addition, the development of focus requires discipline over internal impulses, because the mind constantly produces distractions in the form of emotions, thoughts, desires, and worries, and the ability to recognize these internal interruptions without yielding to them is a hallmark of mental control, self-mastery, and disciplined action. And the practice of returning attention to the task at hand over and over again strengthens this skill, creating neural pathways that make sustained concentration more natural over time. And it is also essential to recognize that focus is a cumulative skill, because the ability to concentrate for hours or days is built upon countless repetitions of redirecting attention, resisting distraction, and maintaining effort. And the more consistently you practice this, the easier and more natural it becomes, until deep work, high productivity, and meaningful results are the default rather than the exception. And another key component of focus is the elimination of trivial decisions and unnecessary mental load, because the human mind has limited cognitive bandwidth, and when too many small, low-value decisions consume attention, less remains available for critical, high-value activities. And by creating routines, automating repetitive tasks, and simplifying choices, you conserve cognitive energy, which allows for greater concentration on the most important work. And focus is further strengthened by discipline in energy management, because sustained attention requires both mental and physical vitality, and habits such as proper sleep, nutrition, exercise, and deliberate breaks are essential to maintaining clarity, concentration, and performance over extended periods, because the mind cannot focus effectively if the body is depleted or overstressed. And yet focus is not just about avoiding distractions, it is also about directing attention proactively, because what you choose to focus on determines the trajectory of your efforts. And by consistently applying attention to high-leverage activities, problem-solving, skill development, and strategic initiatives, you magnify the impact of your actions, creating results that far exceed the mere accumulation of effort. And focus is strengthened by setting boundaries, saying no, and protecting your attention, because each yes to trivial or low-value tasks is a no to meaningful work, and the ability to prioritize attention consistently is a defining characteristic of highly disciplined, high-performing individuals. And another aspect of focus is the cultivation of mental resilience, because sustained attention requires the ability to persist through boredom, frustration, uncertainty, and the natural fluctuations of interest and motivation. And by practicing focus, even when conditions are uncomfortable, repetitive, or uninspiring, you strengthen the mental muscles necessary to act consistently, produce results, and maintain momentum over the long term. And focus is amplified when combined with accountability, because when someone else is observing, measuring, or expecting results, the pressure to sustain attention increases, reducing the likelihood of distraction and reinforcing the habit of sustained action. And over time, the combination of personal commitment, structured environment, disciplined routines, energy management, and accountability creates a self-reinforcing system in which focus becomes increasingly automatic, natural, and productive. And this system produces compounding results, because attention applied consistently to high-value work generates leverage, learning, growth, and accomplishment that expand exponentially over months and years. And yet the development of focus also requires patience, because mastery of attention is not instantaneous, and the mind will often resist, wander, or seek novelty. And the disciplined individual recognizes that each return of attention, each moment of refocusing, is a small victory, a training session for the mind, and a step toward the ability to sustain prolonged, high-impact effort. And by embracing this process, practicing it relentlessly, and applying attention intentionally, you cultivate a level of discipline that makes distraction, procrastination, and inefficiency increasingly difficult, because your habits, environment, and identity all reinforce sustained focus, productivity, and meaningful action. And the ultimate lesson is clear: focus is not optional, it is essential, because without it, time is wasted, effort is diluted, and potential remains unrealized. And by actively training the mind, protecting attention, prioritizing high-value work, eliminating distractions, and combining this with disciplined routines, energy management, and accountability, you create the conditions in which consistent, meaningful, and high-impact action becomes inevitable, which is the essence of self-discipline, the foundation of achievement, and the secret to turning intention into results, potential into accomplishment, and effort into extraordinary outcomes. Because focus magnifies everything you do, compounds results and transforms your life when applied with discipline, persistence, and clarity of purpose. Persistence is the backbone of discipline, the driving force that turns effort into achievement, potential into results, and ambition into tangible success, because without persistence, even the most brilliant plans, carefully laid strategies, or disciplined routines can falter under the weight of obstacles, setbacks, and challenges, and the reality is that life is unpredictable, often unfair, and rarely smooth, and those who succeed are not necessarily the most talented, motivated, or intelligent, but the ones who keep moving forward, taking action, and refusing to quit in the face of adversity. And persistence is not simply about stubbornly continuing without reflection, but about the deliberate decision to endure difficulty, adapt, and overcome obstacles while maintaining alignment with long-term goals, because setbacks, failures, and resistance are inevitable, and the ability to persist through them is what separates those who achieve extraordinary results from those who remain stagnant, frustrated, or unfulfilled. And the cultivation of persistence begins with mindset, because understanding that challenges are part of the process, that discomfort is temporary, and that every obstacle carries an opportunity for growth transforms resistance from a deterrent into a motivator. And persistence also requires resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from setbacks, learn from mistakes, and continue acting even when progress is slow, invisible, or discouraging, because the path to mastery, achievement, and growth is rarely linear, and those who give up at the first sign of difficulty miss the exponential gains that come from consistent effort, reflection, and adjustment. And one of the keys to developing persistence is the establishment of clear goals, because when objectives are defined, measurable, and meaningful, you have a reference point that guides action, sustains motivation, and reinforces the importance of continuing despite obstacles, because clarity provides a compass in the fog of challenges, setbacks, and temporary failures, and persistence without purpose is directionless and unsustainable, whereas persistence grounded in meaningful goals is both resilient and strategic. And persistence also relies heavily on habit, because consistent effort applied over time builds momentum, strengthens resolve, and reduces reliance on fragile willpower, and habits create the structure that allows action to continue even when motivation wanes, confidence falters, or emotions fluctuate. And this combination of habitual action and deliberate perseverance forms the foundation of long-term achievement, because each small, repeated effort compounds over time into results far beyond what isolated, inconsistent action could produce. And yet persistence is not blind or rigid, because it also requires flexibility, adaptation, and learning, because obstacles often necessitate changes in strategy, approach, or tactics, and the persistent individual recognizes the difference between quitting and adjusting, understanding that persistence is about sustained pursuit, not stubborn adherence to a failing method. And this distinction is critical because the ability to continue acting while refining approach ensures progress, avoids wasted effort, and maximizes results. And persistence also requires self-discipline in managing energy, focus, and priorities, because continued effort in the wrong direction, without rest or reflection, can lead to burnout, fatigue, and frustration. And disciplined management of resources ensures that persistence is sustainable, effective, and aligned with long-term objectives. And it is also essential to cultivate mental toughness, because persistence is often tested not by the size of challenges, but by the duration, monotony, and difficulty of sustaining effort over time. And the mind naturally seeks comfort, ease, and immediate gratification, which is why persistent action requires conscious control, the willingness to endure temporary discomfort, and the ability to act despite uncertainty, fear, or resistance. And one of the most powerful ways to reinforce persistence is through accountability, because external expectations, commitments, and feedback provide additional motivation to continue, resist distraction, and maintain focus, and when persistence is combined with accountability, habits, clarity, and resilience, it creates a self-reinforcing system in which consistent effort produces results, which then strengthens confidence, identity, and future persistence. And another critical aspect of persistence is the reframing of failure, because setbacks are not indicators of inadequacy, but opportunities for learning, growth, and refinement. And persistent individuals understand that each failure carries valuable information about what works, what does not, and what adjustments are needed to succeed. And this perspective transforms challenges from threats into guides, from obstacles into stepping stones, and from discouragement into motivation. And persistence is further strengthened by incremental progress, because even small gains build momentum, reinforce effort, and prove that forward movement is possible, which in turn fuels continued action, creating a compounding cycle of progress, confidence, and achievement. And over time, this compounding effect produces extraordinary results, because sustained, focused, and deliberate action, repeated day after day, week after week, and year after year, accumulates into achievements that far exceed initial expectations. And the disciplined practice of persistence also shapes identity, because repeated acts of enduring, acting, and overcoming challenges reinforce the self-perception of someone who is capable, reliable, resilient, and committed. And this identity then further strengthens the habit of persistence, because you are more likely to act in alignment with the person you believe yourself to be, creating a virtuous cycle in which action reinforces identity, and identity reinforces action, and this cycle magnifies both discipline and results. And yet persistence requires patience, because meaningful outcomes, mastery, and growth rarely occur instantly, and the ability to maintain effort despite delayed gratification, slow progress, or invisible results is what differentiates high achievers from those who quit prematurely. And cultivating patience alongside persistence ensures that action is sustainable, intentional, and aligned with long-term objectives rather than reactive, short-sighted, or emotionally driven. And persistence also benefits from focus, because attention directed consistently toward high-value tasks amplifies the effect of effort, reduces wasted energy, and ensures that action contributes to meaningful outcomes. And the combination of persistence, focus, and disciplined action is the formula through which ordinary effort becomes extraordinary, and ordinary individuals transform into highly effective, capable, and resilient achievers. And the ultimate lesson of persistence is that success, growth, and mastery are rarely the result of a single action, brilliant idea, or moment of inspiration, but the cumulative outcome of repeated, deliberate, and resilient action taken over time, despite challenges, setbacks, and emotional fluctuations. And by committing to act consistently, maintain effort despite obstacles, learn from failures, and align actions with long-term goals, you develop the power to overcome almost any challenge, create momentum, and achieve results that once seemed impossible. And in this way, persistence is not just a strategy, it is a way of life, a principle, and a core component of self-discipline, because the ability to keep moving forward, regardless of circumstances, is the ultimate determinant of success, fulfillment, and personal mastery. And those who master persistence gain not only results, but also the confidence, resilience, and identity of someone capable of enduring, overcoming, and achieving anything they commit to. And the lesson is clear: discipline without persistence is fleeting. Goals without persistence remain unrealized, and potential without persistence is wasted, because it is the relentless, repeated, and deliberate action taken despite obstacles, setbacks, and resistance that produces lasting, extraordinary results. And this is the essence of what it means to force yourself to be disciplined. Environment is one of the most underrated yet powerful influences on your discipline, behavior, and ultimate success, because the spaces, people, and systems you surround yourself with shape your habits, your mindset, and your capacity to follow through on commitments. and the reality is that humans are highly influenced by context, and without intentional control over your environment, even the most disciplined intentions can be undermined by distractions, negative influences, or inefficiencies, and the first step in leveraging environment for discipline is awareness, because you cannot optimize what you do not recognize, and this requires a deliberate evaluation of the physical, social, and digital spaces in which you live and work, because cluttered spaces, chaotic routines, toxic relationships, and constant digital notifications erode focus, drain willpower, and encourage procrastination, while clean, structured, and purposefully designed spaces facilitate concentration, efficiency, and consistent action, and the physical environment is perhaps the most immediate and controllable factor, because simple adjustments such as organizing your workspace, reducing visual and auditory distractions, placing tools and resources within reach, and removing unnecessary stimuli create conditions that make disciplined behavior easier, more automatic, and less reliant on fragile willpower. And yet environment is not limited to physical space, because social surroundings exert an enormous influence on behavior, mindset, and identity, because humans are inherently social creatures, and the attitudes, habits, and expectations of those around us shape our own actions and beliefs. And this is why associating with individuals who are motivated, disciplined, supportive, and growth-oriented elevates your own standards, reinforces productive habits, and reduces exposure to negative influence, procrastination, or destructive behaviors. And conversely, spending time in environments where laziness, negativity, or distraction dominate can sabotage even the most committed individual, because social norms, peer pressure, and the subtle cues of others shape behavior often unconsciously, and this demonstrates the critical importance of curating your social environment, intentionally choosing relationships, communities, and networks that support your goals, reinforce your habits, and challenge you to grow, because discipline is contagious, and so is mediocrity, and by surrounding yourself with people who embody the standards you aspire to, you create an ecosystem that consistently reinforces action, effort, and excellence. And the digital environment is equally influential, because constant notifications, social media, streaming entertainment, and endless information overload fragment attention, erode focus, and diminish the capacity to act with purpose. And by implementing digital boundaries such as limiting screen time, turning off non-essential notifications, creating distraction-free workspaces, and controlling the flow of information, you protect your attention, conserve cognitive energy, and strengthen the ability to maintain disciplined, high-value actions over time. And environment also includes routine systems and cues that shape behavior automatically, because humans respond predictably to triggers, contexts, and habits. And by designing systems that nudge you toward productive actions, reinforce desired behaviors, and minimize friction for important tasks, you make discipline easier, more consistent, and more sustainable. And this concept highlights the principle that you do not have to rely solely on willpower or motivation, which are limited and fluctuating, but can instead structure your environment so that the right actions are the path of least resistance. And over time, these small adjustments compound, creating momentum, reinforcing habits, and reducing reliance on fragile internal discipline. And another key factor in shaping an environment that fosters discipline is the removal of negative cues, temptations, and distractions, because every visible or accessible source of procrastination, indulgence, or avoidance increases the likelihood of giving in to weakness. And by intentionally eliminating these triggers, you reduce the number of decisions, increase efficiency, and make it easier to act consistently in alignment with goals, values, and priorities. And this approach also applies to psychological environment, because the narratives, beliefs, and internal dialogue you cultivate influence how you interpret challenges, setbacks, and opportunities. And by creating a mindset-focused environment Through affirmations, visualization, journaling, reflection, and positive self-talk, you reinforce resilience, confidence, and persistence while minimizing internal resistance, self-doubt, and procrastination. And the interaction between physical, social, digital, and psychological environment demonstrates the holistic nature of context in shaping discipline, because each dimension interacts with the others to either strengthen or weaken your capacity to act consistently, maintain focus, and achieve meaningful goals. And understanding this allows you to take control proactively, designing a comprehensive environment that works for you rather than against you. And it is also important to recognize that environment is not static, but dynamic, because circumstances change, relationships evolve, and demands shift, and disciplined individuals periodically review, adjust, and optimize their environment to ensure alignment with current objectives, challenges, and growth opportunities, because what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow, and staying intentional prevents drift, complacency, or erosion of discipline. And the most disciplined individuals are those who recognize the power of context, leverage it strategically, and continuously refine their surroundings, systems, and networks to maximize efficiency, focus, and consistency, because in such environments, disciplined behavior becomes natural, automatic, and self-reinforcing, while the need for constant internal struggle or willpower diminishes. And the ultimate lesson is clear. If you want to force yourself to be disciplined, you must take ownership of your environment, because it is not neutral, it shapes your behavior. And the small, intentional adjustments in physical space, social relationships, digital consumption, routines, and mindset cumulatively create conditions in which disciplined action is the default, progress is inevitable, and growth is unavoidable. And by controlling what you can in your environment, you remove friction, reinforce habits, protect attention, and sustain focus, making the pursuit of goals, mastery, and personal excellence not just possible, but predictable, inevitable, and aligned with your highest aspirations. And this principle demonstrates that self-discipline is not only an internal struggle of will, but a strategic design of context, because when environment supports your objectives, when cues, people, routines, and systems align, acting consistently, resisting temptation, and performing at a high level becomes easier, more automatic, and sustainable. And this is why mastery over environment is not optional, but essential, because it is the invisible framework upon which all disciplined action, progress, and success are built. And those who intentionally craft their environment effectively multiply their capacity for focus, consistency, persistence, and achievement, while those who neglect it struggle against constant friction, distraction, and wasted energy. And understanding this allows you to take control, act strategically, and leverage every aspect of your surroundings to amplify your discipline, results, and potential. Decision-making is a cornerstone of discipline, because every choice you make, no matter how small, compounds over time to shape your results, your habits, and ultimately your life. And yet most people underestimate the impact of their daily decisions, believing that only major actions determine success, when in reality, consistent, disciplined choices, repeated over days, weeks, and years, create the trajectory of their future. And the first step in exercising disciplined decision-making is awareness, because most decisions are made unconsciously, influenced by habit, emotion, convenience, or external pressure. And without conscious attention, you risk choosing actions that favor short-term comfort over long-term growth, distractions over focus, and passivity over responsibility. And disciplined decision-making requires clarity about priorities, because when your goals, values, and long-term vision are defined, you can evaluate choices based on alignment with what truly matters, rather than reacting impulsively to momentary impulses, social pressure, or trivial considerations. And this clarity provides a framework in which decisions become a reflection of intent rather than habit. And another critical element is the ability to delay gratification, because disciplined decision-making often requires choosing the option that delivers long-term benefit rather than immediate pleasure. And this principle is evident in countless areas of life, from finances to health, career, and personal development, because consistently choosing actions that favor growth, investment, and improvement compounds into extraordinary results over time, whereas succumbing to short-term impulses undermines progress, erodes habits, and diminishes potential. And to develop this ability, it is necessary to cultivate self-awareness and emotional regulation, because emotions such as fear, frustration, or desire can cloud judgment, bias decisions, and lead to outcomes that are inconsistent with your goals. And by learning to pause, reflect, and evaluate choices rationally rather than emotionally, you strengthen the capacity to act in alignment with long-term priorities, which is the essence of disciplined behavior. And disciplined decision-making also relies on simplification, because reducing options, minimizing distractions, and creating clear criteria for choices reduces mental fatigue, increases consistency, and allows the mind to focus on high-value actions. And this is why successful individuals often design routines, frameworks, and habits that automatically guide decisions toward productive outcomes. Because the less time and energy spent on trivial choices, the more attention is available for critical decisions that drive growth, performance, and results. And another powerful aspect is the principle of commitment, because once a disciplined decision is made, following through consistently is essential, and action without follow-through is indistinguishable from indecision, which is why accountability, measurement, and reflection are integral, because they ensure that decisions translate into consistent behaviors that reinforce goals, create momentum, and produce tangible outcomes. And disciplined decision-making also involves risk assessment, because not every choice carries equal consequence, and understanding the potential benefits, costs, and likelihood of success allows you to prioritize actions that offer the highest leverage, impact, and alignment with long-term objectives. And this process strengthens both confidence and strategic thinking, because you learn to act decisively while managing uncertainty, rather than being paralyzed by fear, doubt, or over-analysis. And another essential principle is learning from outcomes, because disciplined decision-making is iterative, and each choice provides feedback, data, and insight about what works, what does not, and how to refine your approach. And those who actively reflect on their decisions, adjust strategies, and apply lessons learned improve their effectiveness, judgment, and discipline over time, while those who ignore feedback repeat mistakes, waste energy, and undermine their potential. And it is also critical to recognize that disciplined decision-making requires courage, because many high-value choices involve uncertainty, discomfort, or the risk of failure, and the ability to act despite fear, doubt, or external pressure is what separates consistent performers from those who remain stagnant, because courage reinforces action, strengthens momentum, and creates a track record of results that compound over time. And decision-making is further strengthened by mental frameworks, because creating rules, principles, or criteria for choices reduces ambiguity, accelerates action, and aligns behavior with values. And frameworks such as prioritizing high-impact tasks, focusing on long-term outcomes, or eliminating unnecessary options make decisions simpler, faster, and more reliable, while minimizing regret, second-guessing, and wasted mental energy. And another crucial factor is recognizing that indecision is a choice, because every delay, hesitation, or failure to act is an active decision to maintain the status quo, which often results in lost opportunity, wasted time, and diminished progress. And by reframing indecision as a cost, you create motivation to act, reduce procrastination, and reinforce the habit of disciplined choice. And disciplined decision-making also involves consistency, because repeated choices in alignment with priorities create momentum, reinforce identity, and compound results, whereas inconsistent decisions undermine progress, erode confidence, and create internal conflict. And by committing to deliberate, repeated, and aligned choices, you build a pattern of behavior that makes discipline habitual, reliable, and self-reinforcing. And it is also essential to recognize the interplay between decisions and environment, because a well-structured physical, social, and digital environment reduces decision fatigue, minimizes distractions, and nudges behavior toward high-value outcomes, making disciplined choices easier, more automatic, and sustainable. And when environment, habit, mindset, and accountability are aligned with deliberate decision-making, the result is a system in which action, focus, and results are predictable, intentional, and continuous. And yet disciplined decision-making is not about perfection, because no one makes perfect choices consistently, but rather about building the skill to act intentionally, learn from outcomes, adjust strategies, and persist over time, because growth, achievement, and mastery are cumulative processes that reward consistent, high-quality decision-making rather than isolated acts of brilliance. And the ultimate lesson is clear: if you want to force yourself to be disciplined, you must take control of your decisions, because your choices shape your habits, your actions, your identity, and your results. And by cultivating awareness, prioritization, simplification, courage, reflection, and alignment with long-term goals, you create a system in which disciplined decision-making drives consistent action, produces measurable progress, and compounds into extraordinary outcomes, because each small, intentional choice reinforces habits, strengthens identity, builds momentum, and brings you closer to the life, results, and potential you desire. And this understanding is the essence of self-discipline, because mastery over decisions is mastery over your behavior, your outcomes, and ultimately, your life. Focus on consistency is the secret ingredient that transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary results, because while motivation, talent, and even intelligence play roles in achievement, they are often unreliable, fleeting, and variable, whereas consistent action applied over time compounds into growth, mastery, and tangible outcomes that cannot be achieved through sporadic effort. And yet most people underestimate the importance of consistency, believing that occasional bursts of hard work, intense focus, or dramatic effort are sufficient to produce lasting results, when in reality, it is the cumulative effect of repeated, disciplined action, even if small, that shapes habits, builds skill, and produces momentum. And the principle of consistency applies across every area of life, from personal development to professional performance, health, relationships, and creative pursuits, because success is rarely the result of a single monumental action, but of countless small actions repeated deliberately, aligned with purpose, and maintained over time. And the foundation of consistency is routine, because routines create structure, reduce decision fatigue, and ensure that high-priority actions are executed automatically, without requiring constant motivation or willpower. And by embedding critical behaviors into daily, repeatable routines, you remove friction, minimize reliance on fluctuating emotions, and make disciplined action more natural and sustainable. And yet consistency is not simply about repetition. It is about alignment, because repeated action that is misaligned with your goals, values, or priorities may produce activity, but it will not produce meaningful results. And disciplined individuals ensure that their repeated actions serve their long-term objectives, reinforce growth, and build momentum toward desired outcomes. And consistency is further strengthened by measurement, because tracking performance, progress, and habits allows you to verify that actions are producing results, identify areas for adjustment, and reinforce accountability, because what is measured is often maintained. And without tracking, you risk slipping into complacency, inconsistency, or distraction, undermining both discipline and long-term achievement. And another essential component of consistency is patience, because results rarely manifest immediately. and sustained action over weeks, months, or years is required to translate effort into outcomes, and impatience often leads to abandoning routines, giving in to temporary discomfort, or seeking quick fixes, whereas those who understand the power of cumulative action recognize that every small, repeated effort is an investment in the future, compounding quietly until the results become undeniable. And consistency also relies on resilience, because the path to achievement is rarely linear, and obstacles, setbacks, fatigue, or unexpected challenges can disrupt even the best-laid routines. And by developing the ability to return to disciplined action despite temporary lapses, you maintain momentum, reinforce habits, and ensure that minor disruptions do not derail long-term progress. And this resilience is closely linked to identity, because when consistent behavior is tied to the self-image of being disciplined, reliable, and capable, action becomes automatic, habitual, and self-reinforcing. Because you act in alignment with who you believe yourself to be, and repeated behavior strengthens both identity and future action. And another critical factor is incremental improvement, because consistency is most powerful when paired with deliberate, continuous refinement, because repeated action without learning may create habit, but not necessarily excellence, and by consistently reflecting on outcomes, analyzing performance, and making small improvements, each repetition becomes more effective, efficient, and aligned with your goals, compounding into mastery over time. And yet consistency also demands flexibility, because rigid repetition without adaptation can lead to inefficiency, stagnation, or misalignment with evolving objectives. And disciplined individuals balance steadfastness with strategic adjustment, maintaining core routines while refining methods, timing, or focus to maximize results. And consistency is further reinforced by environmental design, because surroundings, cues, and systems that support repeated action reduce reliance on willpower, minimize distractions, and create conditions in which disciplined behavior becomes the path of least resistance. And by structuring your environment intentionally, you make it easier to act consistently, stay on track, and maintain focus on high-value activities. And consistency is strengthened by accountability, because both internal and external monitoring, feedback, and commitments encourage adherence to routines, reinforce follow-through, and provide motivation to sustain effort even when enthusiasm, energy, or attention fluctuate. And accountability also creates a social dimension to consistency, because when others are aware of your commitments, you are more likely to honor them, reinforcing disciplined behavior and building momentum. And another crucial principle is the power of repetition in building skill, because consistent practice is how mastery is achieved, and repeated exposure, effort, and refinement over time lead to improvements in competence, confidence, and performance. And this principle applies to intellectual skills, physical abilities, creative pursuits, and professional expertise, because mastery is the result of disciplined, persistent, and consistent application rather than occasional brilliance. And consistency also develops reliability and trust, because individuals who act consistently are seen as dependable, capable, and committed, which opens doors, builds relationships, and reinforces opportunities for growth and advancement. And yet consistency is not about perfection, because lapses, setbacks, or temporary failures are inevitable, but disciplined individuals use these moments as opportunities to recommit, reflect, and resume action, because the power of consistency lies in long-term adherence rather than flawless execution. And the ultimate lesson is clear: if you want to force yourself to be disciplined, you must embrace consistency as a non-negotiable principle, because repeated, deliberate, aligned action compounds over time into skill, results, identity, and momentum. And by structuring routines, measuring progress, remaining patient, resilient, adaptable, and accountable, and reinforcing alignment with your highest priorities, you create the conditions in which disciplined behavior is automatic, sustainable, and self-reinforcing, producing growth, achievement, and mastery that few other approaches can achieve, and this understanding is the essence of self-discipline, because it emphasizes the power of repetition, alignment, and persistence, demonstrating that extraordinary results are the inevitable consequence of ordinary actions performed consistently, intentionally, and with purpose over time. Self-awareness is the foundation of discipline, because without a deep understanding of your thoughts, emotions, habits, strengths, weaknesses, and motivations, it is nearly impossible to act consistently in alignment with your goals, values, and long-term vision. And yet most people underestimate the power of knowing themselves, often assuming that intention, effort, or external structure alone is enough to produce meaningful results, when in reality, lack of awareness leads to repeated mistakes, unconscious habits, emotional reactivity, and misaligned effort that undermine progress. And the cultivation of self-awareness begins with observation, because you must first notice patterns of behavior, triggers, responses, and tendencies that either support or hinder your goals, because without observation, action becomes reactive rather than intentional, and growth becomes random rather than deliberate. And this observation is most effective when combined with reflection, because taking the time to consider why you act, how you respond to challenges, and what drives your decisions allows you to identify strengths to leverage, weaknesses to address, and habits to reinforce or change. And self-awareness is not only about recognizing behavior, but also understanding the underlying emotions, beliefs, and thought patterns that influence it, because emotions like fear, doubt, frustration, or desire often dictate action subconsciously, and without awareness, you may sabotage yourself without realizing it. And disciplined individuals learn to notice these internal signals, interpret them, and respond intentionally rather than reacting impulsively, which strengthens self-control, decision-making, and consistent action. And another crucial aspect of self-awareness is understanding your motivations, because knowing why you want a particular outcome clarifies priorities, guides decisions, and sustains effort even when obstacles arise or enthusiasm wanes. And motivation rooted in meaningful values is more resilient and enduring than motivation based on external reward, fleeting desire, or comparison to others. And this understanding allows you to align daily actions with purpose, creating a feedback loop in which progress reinforces identity, confidence, and further self-discipline. And self-awareness also involves recognizing cognitive biases, assumptions, and blind spots, because these mental shortcuts often lead to errors in judgment, misinterpretation of feedback, and poor decision-making. And by identifying these tendencies, you can correct course, make more rational choices, and act in alignment with long-term objectives, thereby strengthening both discipline and effectiveness. And reflection, journaling, meditation, and feedback from trusted sources are powerful tools to enhance this level of self-knowledge, because they provide insight, perspective, and clarity that might otherwise remain hidden in the business of daily life. And self-awareness further requires honesty, because growth depends on the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about behavior, patterns, and performance, because sugarcoating, rationalizing, or ignoring weaknesses prevents improvement, whereas accepting reality, while difficult, provides the raw material necessary for deliberate change, skill development, and mastery. And this honesty must extend to both successes and failures, because acknowledging achievements allows for reinforcement of effective habits, while acknowledging mistakes allows for correction and learning. And disciplined individuals develop the habit of viewing feedback, challenges, and failures not as threats, but as opportunities to learn more about themselves, refine behavior, and improve performance. And self-awareness is also about timing, because understanding your natural energy patterns, peak focus periods, emotional fluctuations, and productivity rhythms allows you to schedule demanding tasks, focus intensive work, or high-stakes decisions during times when performance is naturally higher. and allocate low-energy periods to routine, low-impact activities, thereby optimizing consistency, effort, and results. And another essential element is the awareness of triggers, because knowing the situations, people, environments, or emotions that lead to distraction, procrastination, or counterproductive behavior allows you to implement strategies to mitigate their effects, such as modifying environment, setting boundaries, creating accountability, or practicing preemptive coping strategies. And this predictive aspect of self-awareness reduces reliance on willpower alone, because disciplined behavior is easier when potential obstacles are anticipated and managed proactively rather than reactively. And self-awareness also intersects with emotional intelligence, because recognizing, understanding, and regulating your own emotions enhances self-discipline, communication, and interpersonal effectiveness, because emotional regulation prevents impulsive reactions, supports rational decision-making, and allows for consistent effort even under stress. And this is particularly critical when facing challenges, criticism, or high-pressure situations, because disciplined individuals leverage self-awareness to maintain focus, control responses, and act in alignment with priorities, rather than being hijacked by transient emotional states. And another dimension is understanding personal strengths and weaknesses, because knowing what you excel at allows you to leverage those areas for efficiency, performance, and confidence, while understanding limitations enables delegation, skill development, or focused effort to address gaps. And this self-knowledge prevents wasted effort, misalignment, and frustration, while enhancing the likelihood of consistent progress and achievement. And self-awareness also contributes to identity, because the repeated practice of observing, reflecting, and adjusting reinforces the self-concept of being disciplined, capable, and growth-oriented, which in turn strengthens consistency, persistence, and follow-through, because actions tend to align with how you perceive yourself, creating a self-reinforcing loop between behavior and identity. And yet developing self-awareness is an ongoing process, because humans are dynamic, environments change, challenges evolve, and personal growth requires continual observation, reflection, and adaptation. And those who neglect this process risk stagnation, repeated mistakes, and erosion of discipline, whereas those who maintain regular self-assessment remain agile, intentional, and aligned with their long-term objectives. And finally, self-awareness amplifies every other component of discipline, because it informs decision-making, focus, persistence, accountability, and the design of routines, habits, and environment. And without this foundational understanding of self, all external strategies are weakened, because discipline is not merely about rules or effort, but about knowing yourself well enough to act consistently, strategically, and effectively regardless of emotion, circumstance, or challenge. And the ultimate lesson is clear: if you want to force yourself to be disciplined, you must cultivate self-awareness, because understanding your thoughts, emotions, habits, motivations, strengths, weaknesses, and triggers allows you to act intentionally, design systems that support your goals, make consistent decisions, manage energy, and maintain focus over time. And by developing this deep understanding of yourself, you create the conditions for sustained self-discipline, consistent action, and long-term growth, because you are no longer operating blindly, reacting to impulses or circumstances, but deliberately steering your behavior, effort, and choices toward the life, results, and potential you desire. And this is the essence of true self-mastery, the cornerstone of all discipline, and the foundation upon which consistent achievement, personal growth, and success are built. Taking full responsibility for your life is the ultimate test and expression of discipline, because until you accept that your results, your actions, your habits, and your growth are entirely your responsibility, you remain vulnerable to excuses, blame, and external circumstances that undermine your potential. And the harsh truth is that those who consistently succeed are not the luckiest, most talented, or smartest individuals, but the ones who refuse to blame others, circumstances, or setbacks for their lack of progress, because blaming external factors removes control, erodes accountability, and prevents the necessary reflection and action required for growth. And the first step toward this radical ownership is honesty, because you must look at your life, your choices, and your results without filters, rationalizations, or excuses, because until you see clearly where you have contributed to both success and failure, you cannot act effectively. And this honesty allows you to identify patterns, habits, and behaviors that support or hinder your objectives. And by confronting uncomfortable truths about procrastination, fear, avoidance, or misalignment with goals, you create the foundation for change, because denial, rationalization, or shifting blame only perpetuates stagnation, and taking responsibility also requires rejecting the victim mindset, because blaming others for your circumstances, or feelings is a subtle surrender of power, and those who act with discipline recognize that while you cannot control every external event, you can control your response, choices, effort, and mindset, and in exercising this control, you reclaim authority over your life, actions, and outcomes, which is the essence of self-discipline. And another critical aspect of taking responsibility is accountability, because being answerable to yourself and others reinforces the practice of ownership, ensures follow-through, and creates a feedback loop in which actions align with results, because when you hold yourself accountable, there is no room for excuses, delay, or avoidance, and every choice becomes deliberate, intentional, and aligned with your goals. And this principle extends to every area of life, from personal development and health to career, relationships, and financial management, because in each domain, those who accept responsibility consistently act in ways that create results, while those who blame others remain passive, reactive, and frustrated. And taking responsibility also means embracing the learning that comes from failure, because every setback, mistake, or misstep is an opportunity to evaluate your contribution to the outcome, adjust strategies, and refine behavior. And those who refuse to examine their role remain stuck, whereas those who own their mistakes grow stronger, wiser, and more effective. And this ownership builds resilience, because when you accept responsibility, you stop waiting for others to solve your problems, circumstances to improve, or luck to change, and instead you take initiative, act decisively, and create solutions, which compounds over time into the confidence, competence, and momentum necessary for consistent success. And yet taking responsibility is not about self-blame or guilt, because constructive ownership requires separating evaluation from emotion, analyzing decisions, behaviors, and outcomes objectively, and using insight to guide future action, because dwelling in regret, shame, or self-criticism undermines progress, whereas disciplined reflection and adjustment reinforce growth, self-control, and mastery. And another essential element is proactive action, because responsibility is meaningless without execution, and the act of consistently doing what is necessary, even when inconvenient, uncomfortable, or challenging, is the practical expression of ownership, because it turns insight, awareness, and intention into results, and builds a track record of reliability, resilience, and progress. And taking responsibility also strengthens decision-making, because when you accept that your choices determine your outcomes, you approach each decision with greater care, attention, and alignment with priorities, values, and long-term goals, which further reinforces disciplined behavior, consistency, and accountability. And this is why disciplined, high-achieving individuals rarely wait for circumstances to dictate their actions, because they recognize that their life is a reflection of their choices, and by acting intentionally, persistently, and responsibly, they create outcomes that are not left to chance, emotion, or external factors. And embracing responsibility also requires letting go of blame in relationships, because holding others accountable for your feelings, actions, or success creates conflict, resentment, and stagnation, whereas owning your role in every interaction fosters communication, trust, and growth because you focus on what you can control: your effort, your response, and your behavior, rather than trying to control others, which is both ineffective and demoralizing. And another key factor is forward focus, because responsible individuals do not dwell on past mistakes or external setbacks as excuses, but instead analyze, learn, and redirect effort toward constructive, actionable steps. And this focus on moving forward, rather than retreating into blame or regret, strengthens momentum, reinforces discipline, and accelerates progress. And taking responsibility also reinforces identity, because repeatedly acting in ownership over your choices, habits, and results shapes a self-concept of competence, reliability, and integrity, which in turn makes future responsible action more natural, automatic, and aligned with your values, because identity and behavior are mutually reinforcing. And the more you see yourself as someone who takes full responsibility, the easier it becomes to act consistently, resist excuses, and maintain discipline even under challenge. And the ultimate lesson is that self-discipline is inseparable from ownership, because without accepting full responsibility for your life, effort, and results, all rules, systems, routines, and strategies are undermined by passivity, blame, or avoidance, whereas with ownership, every action, decision, and choice is infused with purpose, alignment, and accountability, producing results that are predictable, sustainable, and entirely under your control. And the power of taking responsibility compounds over time, because every action taken deliberately, every mistake owned, every challenge met, and every outcome accepted builds confidence, mastery, and resilience, creating a life in which growth, achievement, and fulfillment are the natural consequence of disciplined effort. And the contrast is clear. Those who blame external factors remain stuck, frustrated, and reactive, while those who accept responsibility become proactive, resilient, and capable of extraordinary results. And in the end, the ability to force yourself to be disciplined depends on your willingness to fully own your actions, choices, failures, and successes, because discipline is not about waiting for motivation, opportunity, or ideal circumstances, but about deliberately acting, learning, adjusting, and persevering in full acknowledgement that your life is a direct reflection of the responsibility you take. And by embracing this principle, you cultivate the ultimate form of control, self-mastery, and freedom, because when you stop blaming, start owning, and act consistently in alignment with your goals, you create a life defined by purpose, growth, and achievement. And this understanding is the pinnacle of self-discipline, the final chapter in the journey of taking control over your behavior, results, and destiny, and the foundation upon which all other principles of focus, persistence, consistency, environment, self-awareness, and action converge, because mastery over yourself begins with mastery over ownership, and those who truly embrace responsibility unlock the ability to act deliberately, achieve intentionally, and live fully as the authors of their own lives.